Hello everyone, I'm Hugo.
And I'm Jake.
And this is Who Cares, where we are going to discuss and debate the Doctor on his adventures through space and time.
And this week, we discovered that the Doctor just can't help himself when it comes to stealing ideas from Rick Moranis.
This is Howard Frost talking. I'm 35 years old. I'm the head of this division. I'm not the head of this division because I'm a moron. I got the head of this division because
Shut up. Just shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Shut it up.
So welcome back everyone, as I said I'm Hugo.
And I am Jake.
Today we're going to be talking about the episode Flatline, written by Jamie Mathison, who also wrote the last episode, Mummy on the Orient Express. And I'd like to just say, he's been doing an excellent job so far.
Yeah, loved both these episodes. Obviously, no episode is going to be perfect, but I think this one has the coolest monsters of the season.
Definitely, I agree. So we have your typical cold open where there's just a guy on a phone, and he's saying, I know who did it, blah blah blah, but I can't talk, they're everywhere. He basically melts into the wall. So very good cold open to get you like, ooh, what's going on?
Too.
Yes, the CG in this episode is on point.
Yeah, usually effects take away from a sci-fi experience, at least for me, where they're a little over the top. This just kind of rides the line perfectly with like, yeah, that's a Doctor Who thing, and it works, and the visual is neat.
Yeah. So Clara and the Doctor land the TARDIS, and it turns out it's not where she meant to land, but he said something's interfering with the technobabble what's-its. And she makes a very bad lie, because if you'll remember in the last episode, she lied to Danny about staying with the Doctor and doing things with him. So Danny no longer thinks they're traveling together, but...
Yeah.
Whatever, that's tertiary to the episode. They get out, and it turns out the TARDIS is much smaller than it normally is.
And it's a really cool scene, too, because they kind of have to climb out of this, like, medium-sized TARDIS, and they did a good job of making another one, and it's kind of funny, and they kind of, like, are like, well, I don't know what's happening.
I borderline, when I saw pictures of this on the internet before the episode, I thought the joke was going to be kind of stupid. It was actually fairly funny. They did a good job of having the visual humor. It worked.
Yeah, it definitely worked.
The Doctor says, Clara, go check out stuff in the area, because we need you out of here for plot convenience, and...
and also because he's worried, he does mention that he's worried that it might crush her,
yeah.
And he'd rather be in there to be able to help it and not have two of them die if it happens.
So as she's exploring, she meets this guy who's doing community service. He's a graffiti artist, and he's being made to paint over graffiti that he did.
He'll be our write-in companion for the episode.
She sees that there's a memorial, basically, for all these people who've disappeared in the area, and as you know, in Doctor Who, missing people, of course, mean aliens.
Yeah.
So she begins to investigate and tells the Doctor she thinks something's wrong. And he says, I know, you better get back to the TARDIS.
All right. And, for one thing, the mural thing, the memorial looks really cool, and it's kind of creepy and ominous, and it kind of looks like a Banksy thing, and it's really neat.
I knew the premise of the episode, so I knew what was going to happen. Also, in the next time, they kind of spoiled it, too. They showed the stuff turning around. I wish they wouldn't do that necessarily. Yeah. Even though you kind of expect it, still it'd be nice if they wouldn't necessarily show it. And when Clara returns to the TARDIS, it's now tiny, toy-sized. It looks like they actually used a TARDIS toy a little bit, and they just taped a thing for the green screen over it. The one effect that I thought wasn't very good in the episode was
his face?
Yeah, it was his face in the TARDIS. It didn't look very... It looked like it was kind of a bad green screen.
Yeah, and later on they'll have scenes where like his hand or something else will come out of the...
And that looks fine.
And that looks fine. But it is, when I noticed that too, when he's in there, it clearly was like a green screen, and they tried their best, and it just didn't look quite right for some reason.
Which is weird, because the rest of the effects in the episode are really good.
Yeah.
But maybe all the budget went to that, and last minute they're like, oh, no, just slap the thing on there. So now that the door is so much smaller, the Doctor is trapped in the tiny TARDIS, and he says, Clara, you basically have to be me. You have to go investigate and find out what's happening. Yeah. Passes her the psychic paper and the sonic screwdriver, and she's like, all right, and they make jokes about it, obviously. And that comes down to what this episode is sort of about. It's Clara having to do the things the Doctor does, and I think this is intentional, as one of the themes this season are, is he a good man, and she doesn't quite know, and I think part of this episode is trying to show her, and through her, the audience, what he has to go through to do what he does.
Kind of like a walk a mile in their shoes sort of thing. And it works. I think they pulled it off without making it, like, too forced.
Mm-hmm. She goes and meets back up with that graffiti artist kid who, as we said, becomes sort of her de facto companion. He takes her to the house of a guy who went missing. They notice a thing on the wall It's a mural of a desert, which comes into play later. And she basically investigates and uses the sonic screwdriver a lot more than the Doctor normally does, which I almost think is supposed to be a little humorous.
It's kind of like a crutch at this point, because she doesn't necessarily know all the things the Doctor would know, but she does have this, so maybe she's trying to overuse it.
Maybe. Then, because the guy starts thinking she's crazy, she has to introduce the kid to the Doctor, and, you know,
it's a
typical.
good scene.
Yeah, it's an alright scene. I mean, it felt like they just had to do it, so it was thrown in there, and he's like, oh, it's bigger on the inside, and the Doctor makes a joke, yeah, more than ever these days.
Yeah.
So they go to the second victim's house, and this one is where the plot really starts moving. She shows the psychic paper to a cop. She says, I'm with MI6, you need to let me in. And the Doctor hands her a sledgehammer out of her bag. And
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, he says basically, I think they're in the walls, which is a weird thing for the Doctor to think, but I think they just wanted the visual joke. The cop goes into the other room, and this is where we get the first introduction really to the monster of the episode and how they work. And this is where we're saying the special effects are really good in this episode, as Clara and the other dude are smashing up the wall. In one room, the woman begins to melt into the floor, sort of.
And it looks really painful and crazy. It's one of the more violent Doctor Who deaths you actually get to see, which is kind of neat. And then almost immediately after that, they turn around and the Doctor mentions, hey, look, what is that? And it's like a circulatory system mural on the wall. And basically, it turns out it's probably her circulatory system.
Yeah. The Doctor discovers that there are 2D beings who live in a 2D dimension that is parallel to our own, that are now trying to learn about humans and sucking them sort of into a two-dimensional plane so they can study them, which is a kind of disturbing idea for Doctor Who. The image of her circulatory system, it looks almost artsy, and that it's laid out on the wall, sort of looks like tree branches. And that's really cool. And the effects for making things 2D is really good too. For instance, in the next scene, they make the couch 2D and the chair 2D. Very, very good.
And it's sort of melty, and we're showing visuals now, but it's like sort of melty, but like chaotic at the same time. So it has this really good crinkly / fluidity thing going on, and it totally works.
So the room starts to melt stuff. Clara and the guy have to jump up on this chair that's hung from the wall that this person happened to have.
Well, apparently they had like one of the most pretentious hipsters die to these 2D beings, so they got to have the hanging orb chair.
And this is where Clara gets her first phone call with Danny, and again it establishes that she's lying to him, but here he starts to get suspicious, which I definitely think is going to play into the next episode, because he's in it, and I think it's going to come out finally that she's still with him, and he's going to be very upset because she's now lying to him for the second time.
And you know who else is upset? The Doctor.
Yeah.
Because she lied to him too about saying that Danny was okay with it. And so there's kind of this interpersonal thing going on, and you can tell that she's kind of being very selfish, and maybe that's not the best thing to do at this point.
Yeah. So her and the graffiti artist kid, they run back to the area where the mural was. Turns out the mural is copies of the people that the monsters of the episode, who will later at the end be referred to as the Boneless.
Which is a really cool name for a creepy thing like that.
Yeah, they've been using the images of those people, and they're trying to come into the third dimension. There's this really cranky old guy who is part of the group that's painting over the mural stuff, and he comes into play later, but he's just such a jerk. And interestingly, Clara tries to show him the psychic paper and say she's a member of whatever, and he says, that's just a blank piece of paper.
Which is awesome, because for a split second you think, is he going to be really important? And then the Doctor has a line almost immediately like, some people just are so bad off that they don't have a good enough imagination even for the psychic paper to work on them. So it's like,
which is interesting. I always like the psychic paper. I like bits with it, so I appreciate that sort of thing. Then the murals start to turn around, and they all freak out. Clara has to take charge of the situation and tells them to run, and they run into this warehouse. And the Doctor's talking to her, and this is the part where we really get her having to step into the Doctor's shoes moment. He says to her, here's what's going to happen. This group of people are all very scared, and someone's going to step up and become a leader, and you need to make sure you're that person.
Which I really like, because you're kind of getting into the mode that the Doctor goes into, and he's consciously thinking about this kind of stuff when he's in that situation, but since he can't, he's got to coach Clara on how to do it. So it makes you think that every time he's in that situation, he's like, okay, I have to establish dominance almost immediately, and I have to take charge, because these people are just not me.
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting to see him kind of be open about his modus operandi.
Yeah. Also, interestingly, Clara says to him, do I need to lie to them?
Yeah.
Almost immediately, and he's like, why? But he seemingly knows why, the way he delivers it. She says, because people who are hopeful tend to run faster because they think they have a chance to survive. And he says, yeah, it's probably the best if you lie, essentially. Which, again, comes into play if you think all the time the Doctor's ever talked to people in these sort of situations. He usually seems pretty hopeful.
And he's usually lying to them.
Yeah, he's just trying to get them motivated to try and keep them alive, but he knows the chances they're going to die are pretty high, and that's interesting. Really good character development for the Doctor this season.
Absolutely.
In at least that we get a closer look at what his motivations are and why he does the things he does.
Yeah.
So Clara does basically establish herself as the leader, and the Doctor decides maybe these flat people from the second dimension aren't really malicious, maybe they just don't understand, so they attempt to communicate using basic math.
And whoever knows Doctor Who knows that usually his first tactic is always trying to reason with the thing that's attacking, or at least assumedly attacking. And at first they start naming off numbers, like I think the first one's 55 or something, and the next one's 22. It's their uniform numbers for the guys that were in the repaint the walls group.
The Doctor says, they might not be threatening us, you don't know, and Clara says essentially the same thing. The grumpy guy disagrees, and turns out he's right. They turn around, and in a really cool shot, it turns out that the 22 guy is already turned into 2D, and it's on the wall, but it's just a forced perspective shot.
I love those kinds of things anyways, and they do that really well in this episode to make it work.
They run away, they get into a tunnel, but turns out, the door has been 2D'd, so it's flat now and they can't open it. And
that's a cool effect too, because they did it to the door handle earlier in the apartments when they were hanging on the ball swing thing. Yeah, and I think it's a neat thing because it starts giving you that sort of helplessness that the Weeping Angels give you, which while we were watching it, Hugo and I both said, it's really cool. It's like another version of that, only a kind of worse, because they can change the environment and they just kind of lurk slowly after you as opposed to running after you hardcore or shooting lasers at you. It's more of a creepy thing, and I hope they bring them back.
Yeah, and at this point we actually get the three-dimensional versions of these things. They finally break through into the real world. And this effect is really good in almost how incomplete it looks. It's very glitchy. Yeah. It's almost like they can't fully figure out how to make themselves work in 3D.
Yeah, and they walk weird.
Yeah. So they look like weird, partially rendered people. Good visual for them. The Doctor invents a little device for them, which he calls the 2-dis. Get it?
And then he makes a joke. And it actually works because he's... I like when the Doctor gets excited about shit in the middle of a crisis, because he's just so... He's just so, I don't know, what's the word? Evasive with his ideas.
So they do run away, but the grumpy guy gets mad and grabs the... They didn't explain this very well, but they needed to get him out of the way. He grabs the TARDIS, the little mini TARDIS, out of Clara's purse and throws it down a subway shaft. And she loses communication with the Doctor for a while. They continue to run away until they're in a different room, and the Doctor's like, I think I'm on train tracks. Clara's like, move the TARDIS, and he's like, I can't. The power's drained because the 2D people have been draining stuff. And she's like, no, move it. You move it. And he's like, oh, okay. Again, with the funny visual humor, pokes his hand out of the TARDIS and uses it to kind of walk the TARDIS off the tracks.
And it totally works. That is such a Doctor Who crisis management situation. Yeah. And when it first poked out, I thought, but then it just kept going, and you're like, a train's coming, about to run him over, and he's doing this awkward, weird thing, and it's totally sci-fi, just porn, basically, and it totally worked.
Clara and the other workers and stuff end up in this abandoned subway tunnel as the things are running towards them, the boneless. They're able to stop a train and say to the guy, can you ram these things? And he actually goes, yeah, I've always wanted to ram something. That guy was on board immediately. He didn't need much of an explanation.
He was kind of the funniest character in the episode just because of how on board he was, and not really, he seemed very neutral about almost everything that happened.
Yeah. So, they do ram the thing after Clara has kind of a false... Her companion almost tries to sacrifice himself, but it ends up just being a comedy moment that they probably could have cut out. But, it's kind of endearing. Yeah. And as it's about to ram into the things, they make it 2D and push it into the wall, and that's kind of a cool shot, too. Yeah. They discover the TARDIS, though, because it actually almost did get hit by the train, even though he tried to move it, and he put it into siege mode, is what they call it. Yeah. Looks a little bit like a tiny Pandorica, but with,
I was going to say that, too.
Gallifreyan writing on it.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it's just... Whatever dimensions the TARDIS is in, it's hidden in this tiny box, and there's no exit or entrance. So the Doctor is in the TARDIS, but its power is completely drained from the 2D people, the boneless, and he's now dying because there's no oxygen. So Clara is alone, it's the climax, she's with all the people, but she has no doctor to help her, and she decides I have to figure out what to do.
So they do something actually that's pretty clever and kind of a little bit foreshadowed. But it's good for her because usually this is kind of a doctor thing, and that's kind of the point. They have a old map, and they flip it over, and they have the graffiti artist draw a 2D door because they've been messing with the doors the whole time while running through the tunnels. And apparently it's good enough to trick them, so they put it on a wall, and behind that wall they put the siege mode TARDIS, and the idea is that they'll zap the door, try to make it 3D so they can come through it and try to get the people, but instead it powers up the TARDIS, giving the Doctor a fully functional TARDIS, and it gets to full size, and he can defeat the enemy.
And this is a great scene. This is my favorite scene in the episode because, for one, we get some cool the TARDIS flying around the tunnels, and then when it finally does start to resize to the correct size, it has a really cool thing where it slams back on the tracks and it feels solid, and it's like, boom, there's the TARDIS. And the Doctor has his speech here, a speech that I've almost been waiting for all season. I think we'll get a version of it in the last 2 episodes too, but this is kind of a good precursor to it, where he says, I tried to communicate with you. I think you do understand us, but I think you want to destroy us or conquer us. It doesn't matter. The point is, you chose the role of the monster, so now it's my turn to be what I am. I'm the guy who stops the monsters. I am the Doctor.
And it was awesome, and Capaldi just nailed it. You know when Matt Smith used to get intense, and the only one that you really remember is Rings of Akatan?
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to get a bunch of Rings of Akatan moments from Capaldi.
Yeah, which is good.
It was just so good, and he owns that scene, and it doesn't feel over the top. It feels like, because he acts the hell out of it, so it totally works.
So he gets out of the TARDIS, zaps them with the sonic screwdriver, which somehow destroys them immediately. I wish they would have figured something else out.
They mentioned that he was tinkering with a way to defeat them, and he had to get power in the TARDIS to defeat them.
Yeah.
But they don't, they don't have that wacky gizmo that he makes on the fly that ends up. It just kind of happens, and it's implied.
I guess, but it's just a little Deus Ex Machina.
Totally.
Yes. So the Doctor takes the rest of the people back on the TARDIS after he defeats the Boneless, who he names in that speech. The naming of them is what makes us think that they're going to come back.
Yeah, and even if they didn't, I think they're just neat enough to...
Yeah, they're pretty cool. It'd be interesting to explore their motivations a little more.
Absolutely.
I'm okay with ambiguity, but I think they're interesting enough to warrant a little bit more of a backstory.
Right, because at least like the Weeping Angels, which again we're drawing parallels because they're not very similar, but they're similar enough. The Weeping Angels need energy, and that's how they feed, and they jump across time and stuff like that. So we don't know anything about these guys, which is really interesting, and I hope they do explore it, and hopefully they get us a really nice dark story in the future seasons with at least them one more time.
Yeah. So the Doctor takes them all back to the surface of the city that they're in, next to the train tracks. They all say goodbyes. The grumpy guy says to the extent of, at least no one important died. All the people who died were just trash or were doing community service for stuff. And it's interesting, too, because I think the Doctor looks at this guy, and I think it's supposed to be a little bit of a juxtaposition. Because early this season, we see that the 12th Doctor is a little more okay with sacrificing people to save more people.
Yeah.
And I think he's seeing sort of a dark reflection of what he could be if he took that to the fullest extent in this guy. He still, at his heart, is saying, people's lives do matter, but I have to make hard decisions sometimes, whereas this guy is just a jerk who doesn't care about the lives of others.
As long as he makes it out.
Yeah. They say goodbye to the graffiti guy. I'm a little surprised the Doctor didn't offer him to go, too, like he did in the conductor in the last episode.
Yeah, I think maybe it was just because he didn't have a very, he had, no connection with him except through Clara.
I guess, but he did show he was very brave, although I guess the Doctor didn't really see that, so
yeah,
whatever. And then the Doctor and Clara have a good, earnest moment, too, right after she gets a phone call from Danny, but she ignores it. So again, in the next episode, I assume we will get the fallout from her lies, and that'll be interesting. Because don't get me wrong, Clara has developed more of a character this season, but she's also made a lot of mistakes, so I kind of want to see her not pay for the mistakes. I want her to feel the consequences of them and try and change accordingly and try and be more honest, because she's very okay with lying at this point.
Yeah, and it seems like what they're setting it up for is a major death.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a little bit on the last episode about how we think it might be Danny. I don't know, but it seems like we're going to build up to something pretty awful for at least one of those characters.
Yeah. So Clara then has a conversation with the Doctor that says, "Didn't I do good? I did pretty good as you." And the Doctor says, "You made a great doctor." And she said, "So why won't you just tell me I did good?" And he says, being good has nothing to do with it. You were just an excellent doctor. And this plays into the major theme of the season, the morality of the Doctor, and is he a good man? Because at his heart, we see that however we define him, the Doctor believes that being the Doctor at his core has nothing to do with being a good person. It has to do with making the hard choices and saving lives, whatever that may mean. And that's what Clara did. She lied to people, she manipulated people, she did things that were probably illegal, and she almost, if she didn't have that hairband with her, might have had to sacrifice someone else's life to help better serve her goals in saving people. And that's kind of what the Doctor does. At the end of the day, he tries to do his best and save people, but he doesn't necessarily always do it in the best of means. He does the best he can, and that's how he sees himself. Not necessarily as a good man, but as a person who does the best he can and tries to help people. But he doesn't consider that good, he just considers that his role. And I think that's very interesting.
And I found it interesting, and again, we're getting a lot of really good insight on the Doctor and how he thinks about not just everything around him, but also himself, which is new. And I think it's a good thing. I think he's starting to realize that maybe his internal crisis is a real one he should be having. Like, maybe he really should be questioning his motivations and the results of it. And I think it's weird for a sci-fi series that's so outlandish to explore that kind of thing in a serious way that still works. And I think they're doing a good job. For all the faults in this season with like the Robin Hood ending and some of the just the corny stuff that didn't work in the bulk of the episodes, I think the stuff that's carrying through between episodes is some of the best we've seen, especially as far as Doctor development.
I agree. So, the last thing we need to talk about before next time is, of course, the Missy speculation, because she does finally, after a couple episodes, have another scene. We just see her at the end, it zooms out, she's on an iPad, because apparently in heaven there are iPads, or wherever she is. It almost bugged me that she had an iPad, because I get that they need to understand that it's a tablet, but it just kind of bugged me a little bit that it was specifically an iPad. But that's not a big deal. Yeah. She sees Clara on it, and she says, "Oh, my Clara, I picked wisely," essentially. I think this kind of closes the case on who the woman in the shop was who gave Clara the number. It's very heavily implied that Missy is the one who got them together, so I think Missy was the woman in the shop, and it's... I mean, they never fully said it, but by this line, I think we're pretty sure.
Yeah, and also, Hugo and I were talking before we even watched this episode today. We don't know if Missy's actually the bad guy anymore, but she comes across a little evil, I guess, like malicious, I guess is the better word, in this very short scene. But at the same time, all the stuff she's doing seems very like they're setting her up with such a big personality that she could like interact with the Doctor in a positive way.
I don't think it's necessarily evil. I consider her like a puppeteer. I think she knows what she wants to happen, and she's setting up all the pieces to fall down how she wants them to. So I think it seems malicious, but really she's just saying, yes, it's all going according to my plan. That doesn't necessarily make her evil. It makes her almost like the Doctor in the fact that she's setting a plan and seeing it through to the end and making sure everything happens as she planned. Yeah. It's almost Doctor-esque, which makes me think maybe Valeyard... I don't know. I really don't want to speculate as to the identity at this point. Probably a completely new character, but some people, and us included, kind of like to guess if it's maybe a character we've seen before. But I don't want to speculate as to that, because I think at this point it could really go either way. So, very interesting, though. I'm excited to see what will happen in the next 3 episodes of the season. We are almost done, people. And next time, we get the last standalone episode before the season finale, and that is In the Forest of the Night, which looks very interesting. And it's the Doctor lands in London, but the entire place has been overtaken by a forest and wild animals.
It looks interesting. It looks really interesting. And there's apparently like a school trip, and Danny's in it, and it looks fun. It looks like it's going to be one of those kind of quirky... I don't think it's going to be too dark, but I think it's going to be well done.
And you know what? I think at the end of the episode, we might even discover that this has something to do with Missy's plan. Yeah. It's getting so close to the end that I think they're going to really start to unravel some of these mysteries. So stay tuned and come back next time when we'll talk about that. Until then, thanks everyone. I'm Hugo.
And I'm still named Jake.
And this has been Who Cares?